everyone. Welcome to our third APAC podcast. Today we'll be discussing the Japanese and Korean markets. At datacenterHawk, we provide accurate and deal-back data gathered by a team of experts to help you make better and faster data center decisions. My name is Joelyn Chong, and I am an insight analyst for APAC based in Singapore. And together with me is Tom Flanagan, our senior insight analyst for APAC. He's based in Tokyo, and he covers Tokyo, Osaka, and Seoul. Among the markets we cover, Tokyo is the largest by power, and Osaka and Seoul have also been receiving plenty of attention recently. How are you doing today, Tom?
Great, Joe. It's very nice to see you. Thanks for inviting me in today.
It's very nice to see you too. I look forward to the insight you'll be providing today. Okay, so Tom is the expert when it comes to Japan and Korea, and I definitely go to him whenever I have any questions about those markets. And I encourage you to do so as well. Even if you don't have questions about data centers, you can approach him anytime, as he's the most interesting man on earth. I'm sure you'll have endless topics to talk about. Okay, diving into our conversation today. All right. As we have seen, the data center market in APAC has evolved rapidly over the past few years. There's insane growth in a short amount of time, mature markets that are well established and can host many data center providers and their facilities have emerged. And secondary or emerging markets are also gaining more attention due to factors such as overspill demand and the ability to offer more competitive costs. Which categories would you place Tokyo, Osaka, and Seoul in?
Very good questions, Joe. Yes, Tokyo, Osaka, and Seoul have all seen accelerating growth in the data center market over the last several years for sure. First of all, I'd say the reason is definitely not competitive costs. For example, despite the Japanese yen slipping to historic lows recently against the US dollar, Tokyo remains, believe it or not, the single most expensive city in the world to build a data center. Even more expensive than, for example, Zurich, Switzerland. So, Seoul and Osaka are not far behind on costs. So, if cost is your priority, this is not the right place to be building. And these are all very mature markets. Tokyo, Seoul, and Osaka share many common features. Both countries, Japan and Korea, have aging populations, businesses and workforces concentrating in these cities. So that keeps the developers concentrated on these respective metropolitan areas, rather than looking farther afield. I mean, there's certainly some of that, but the data center development activity really still is very much concentrated in the major cities. The most extreme example, perhaps, is Seoul. More than half of South Korea's population lives in the Seoul National Capital Area. That includes nearby Incheon and the surrounding Gyeonggi province. So, more than half of the country. So it's tough for other parts of South Korea to compete with that concentration of economic and population power. Over in Japan, approximately 40 million people live just in Tokyo's vast metropolitan area. So to put that in context, 40 million people, that is roughly the same population as the entire state of California. And we've got that in one city in Japan. So other locations in Japan and Korea, they may have more power available, cheaper land, but they have less connectivity, fewer young skilled workers available to operate and maintain the facilities. So these three large cities still have a lot of competitive advantage despite costs and other issues.
Very interesting, Tom. I completely agree with your observations. Tokyo and Seoul are very densely populated cities. There's a lot of people and businesses competing for the same resources. So, yeah, it totally makes sense that cost is definitely not the lowest there. All right, okay, moving on. Nearer to me, emerging markets like Johor, Jakarta, and Bangkok have had many new projects. Like just a couple of years ago, Johor had less than 50 megawatts of capacity, and today Johor has earned the reputation of being the fastest growing data center market in APAC. These emerging markets are growing fast, and clear data center clusters are starting to form. So Tokyo and Osaka are obviously more advanced than these Southeast Asian markets. Did you see the same happen for Tokyo and Osaka?
uh, uh, to an extent, but yes, as you noted, certainly Johor in particular. I think Johor has benefited a lot from the land and power constraints of nearby Singapore, which had been for so many years, the major APAC node. So it's a very natural alternative, Johor, just a hop, skip, and a jump away across the causeway. Certainly also glad to see Jakarta, Bangkok, other locations in Southeast Asia benefiting from expansion of demand and sort of a deconsolidation across Southeast Asia. It's a great development to see. Tokyo, Osaka, and Seoul kind of had a different sort of a starting line. Japan and South Korea have highly advanced economies with huge homegrown telecommunications conglomerates, which had already built out very significant digital infrastructure in their home markets before this recent boom. What has changed in recent years is the interest of foreign capital. Although operators like Equinix, for example, have been active in Japan since the early 2000s, things began to change after the global financial crisis in 2008. As many companies started moving operations to the cloud around that time, the U.S. hyperscalers began to see demand increase drastically, and they demanded greater capacity, and the markets responded. In Japan, companies like Fidelity-backed Colt data center services were already on the ground and able to take advantage of that surge from the hyperscalers. In Korea, there was a local nuance. The homegrown hyperscalers like Naver and Kakao began to drive a significant amount of demand there. So skipping ahead a little bit to the pandemic. During the pandemic, the hyperscalers struggled to respond to the surge of digital consumption from people now working from home, conducting business from home. So the hyperscalers snapped up all the capacity they could. As they were snapping up capacity, this further encouraged multinational investors to enter these markets. You can see in these recent several years, particularly since the pandemic, foreign capital has financed much of the recent growth.
Thank you for that answer. It's very interesting. Okay, so we're going to talk about a very popular topic right now. Okay, so right now the whole world is talking about AI. There are new models popping up all the time, and APAC has also passed the nascent stage as it is not just for businesses now. Countries are adopting AI at a nationwide level. It is also generally a huge demand driver for data centers. So how sustainable do you think this wave will be in the markets that you cover?
The AI boom has certainly reached the shores of Japan and Korea. It's a global phenomenon. And pretty much every new data center development that the builder or the developers and operators are touting their high density and AI ready infrastructure. It's a global phenomenon for sure. Japanese domestic players like SoftBank and KDDI also have announced huge new AI data center projects in Osaka. The domestics do not want to be left behind as the AI train leaves the station. However, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag. As I'd mentioned, Japan and South Korea are both very high cost countries for building, for doing business. AI, particularly AI training, machine learning training, that can be done pretty much anywhere that has sufficient power. So it's not really so clear whether Japan, Korea, whether these are places where a huge amount of AI training is going to take place. It doesn't. They don't need low latency near the large cities, but even out in the countryside in these countries, it's not cheap. There are other disadvantages. So maybe the AI training will stay in the deserts of the United States and in places like Australia. It's not so clear how much of this is going to be done in this part of the world. Perhaps with data sovereignty laws, certain types of AI training cannot be done abroad. It's certainly there will be an impact here, but the exact nature of it and how it's going to develop going forward is not entirely clear to me or to a lot of folks in the market here. It's a big topic of conversation. The hyperscalers also they still seem to have their hands full ensuring that they can grow capacity to meet the growth of their core cloud services, which is not necessarily directly related to AI services just yet. So that model in its current paradigm continues on at pace.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very interesting. So, I mean, there are a lot of global constraints when it comes to stuff like that as well. When you talk about large campuses, everyone's competing for land, power, and water, and I'm sure in those populated cities, it's going to be really hard and very costly to secure. So, have you observed any challenges that Japanese and Korean providers have run into, and what are the usual solutions?
Oh, there are so many challenges. I'm not sure where to begin, but let's say in Seoul, one of the big topics of discussion is that compared to other countries, that there's unusually high level of community objection. As I said, the data center development is very, very largely centered around Seoul, densely populated areas, and very often there are residential communities, tower blocks around the development sites. And seems that a lot of folks in South Korea, they have concerns about electromagnetic radiation from transmission lines, and they're very vocal. They make their concerns heard very loudly. So there've been a number of high-profile cases where developers have to, how do they solve that? They take the time to discuss with the community, to make some compromises, to bury transmission lines, to do whatever's necessary to get projects approved and to move forward. There's no real quick fix. The government now concerned about those community objections and also concerned about too much of the concentration of the network around Seoul. They're now encouraging operators to build outside of the Seoul national capital region. To mixed success. They're also placing new regulations to ensure that developers that they generate a certain amount of the power on site and do other things to reduce the amount of transmission to and from the sites. So a lot of mitigation actions going on. So there are also many other challenges in both countries, and in Japan, where I live, again, the aging workforce. All of the general contractors, they are suffering. They do not have enough labor, huge labor shortages, and increased costs for labor. And it's not so easy to simply import labor. There's a huge language barrier. Foreign skilled laborers coming in will not be able to function the same way on construction sites. So that is increasing the timelines. It also disadvantages new entrants to the markets, because established data center operators and developers like NTT, KDDI, some of the operators, the foreign operators who've been here for years that are established, like Colt or AirTrunk, they have good relationships established, but other new entrants are finding it challenging to get the time of the general contractors to commit to their projects. So again, extended timelines. No quick solution, but Japan is a country that's famous for foreign concerns, not just in data centers, but in many industries, coming in here and having to cooperate with local firms in order to have big success. Maybe the most famous example is Disney. Tokyo Disneyland is probably the most successful amusement park in the Disney portfolio, but it's not owned by Disney. Disney came into Japan. A Japanese company, Oriental Land, is the owner, and they simply license Disney for their amusement park and had a great big success. McDonald's came in here, and one of the franchisees started up the local McDonald's entity and has a great success. So some of the foreign entrants here have had success by simply partnering up with big Japanese firms. That gets them the connections to the general contractors, to potential clients. So, there are different ways to skin a cat, and there are different ways to find solutions to these interesting and unique challenges that developers are finding in Japan and Korea.
So that goes to show you make friends everywhere you go. You never know what connections you will need in the future, right?
Absolutely, Jolene. That's terrific general advice.
Okay. All right. Last couple of questions. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the current power landscape in Japan and Korea? I've heard that there's a lot of buzz around nuclear reactors in Japan, and there's a lot of restrictions in Seoul. Would you give a little bit of insight to that?
Sure, sure. I'll share what I know. I mean, I think everybody listening, unless there are some teenagers listening, probably everybody knows that there was an absolutely enormous earthquake, tsunami, and ensuing nuclear disaster in Japan, which is now 14 years ago, 2011. And that was absolutely traumatic for the country, but it was traumatic for energy production because the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant was overwhelmed with the tsunami, and three of the reactors melted down. The entire plant shut down, and the company TEPCO is Tokyo Electric Power Company. They're responsible for the vast area of Tokyo surrounding, or of Japan surrounding the Tokyo area. At that time, 14 years ago, they operated 17 nuclear reactors in the TEPCO area, powering more than 30% of the power needs of the Tokyo region. And all of them shut down in the wake of the nuclear disaster. And now, 14 years have passed, and guess how many of those 17 nuclear reactors are back online?
I have no
Zero. The answer is
idea.
zero. So TEPCO, the biggest power company in Japan, has no nuclear energy at the moment,
Wow.
uh, and it has recovered to a certain degree in the Kansai area around Osaka and up to the north in Hokkaido. There are reactors online, but TEPCO area, where the vast majority of data centers are concentrated in Japan, has no nuclear power available. And there are some reactors that are ready to go. In fact, TEPCO was planning to launch its first nuclear reactor on the Sea of Japan last October, but local community concerns and objections has stalled this, and now the first nuclear reactor to go back online is scheduled for 2029. And that's one reactor is a gigawatt of energy. So it's a little bit of a disappointment that we have to wait another couple of years. But in the meantime, Japan did not sit on its hands. There's been a massive increase in carbon-based energy production, in renewables, in solar and wind, etc. And so the power supply has increased, but it remains a challenge, especially in the Tokyo area. But to be quite honest, a lot of the data centers are not fully utilizing. There's more power available than is actually being consumed. We have a lot of data center contracts and data centers that are operating at less than full capacity. So we've got a little bit of a ramp up before things become a crisis. It's okay. Situation is challenging, but not insurmountable. In South Korea, as you said, there are different issues. The network is really very much focused on Seoul, and the government has last summer implemented a brand new set of regulations that put not just data centers, but any companies that are planning developments that are going to that are projected to consume 10 megawatts or more, to go through a review process to get approval, and also to put forward plans for how they will generate portion of the electricity on site. So it's laborious, but companies are going through the process. Companies that already have the approvals, from before that process started, projects that began before last summer, they have a tremendous advantage. And it's clear, starting with the sale of the Hanam data center last summer in Seoul, which apparently doubled the cost that went into it, in the sale price, that those who own assets with the proper approvals that are built or under construction, those are going to be very valuable assets. So
Lucky
there should be some word of really, interesting real estate deals coming out of Seoul in the coming months and years.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you for that. I mean, if there's upcoming supply, that's better news than restricted and running out of power, right? Thank,
Absolutely.
yeah. Thank you so much for your answers. You've provided so much insight into these highly interesting markets. Is there anything we didn't cover that you would like to add?
Oh, I could talk all day, Jolyn. This is a lot of fun. Love
Yeah, we
this
can take this
industry, but
offline.
I think that pretty much covers it for today. But certainly, anybody interested in the Japan and Korea data center markets, please feel free to reach out. Love to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you and talk data centers.
Yes, please do. Tom is a wonderful person to talk to. I love the conversations that we have. Thank you so much for your time today, Tom. I look forward to learning more from you about the markets and seeing you on future podcast episodes. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you, Jolyn.
Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye
Talk to
bye.
you. Bye.